Welcome everybody to the I guess podcast here with Firas Zahabi. Thank you for joining me today. Highly requested that we did a little collaboration before the fight based on that kind of sequence of videos. So you had your AMA, which a lot of people wanted to know what your stance was on the drug testing and who is going to be using what, or who do you think is going to win and why? Do you think it's going to be an unfair advantage for one or the other because of that? And you had a pretty bold stance where you said Jake Paul is going to be, you think he's going to be on an array of PEDs and Tyron's going to be totally natural. And you got quite a few articles, man. If you go to Google News, you're like all over the place right now for that one statement.
That's just my honest opinion. And you know what? I take Jake Paul's fighting skills seriously. That's why I'm saying that. I think it's gonna be a hard fight for both of them. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's gonna be a one-sided thing. Either guy can knock the other guy out. They both prove they have knockout power. I mean, a lot of people are knocking Ben Askren win. No, that's a legitimate win. Ben Askren has taken shots from some of the hard hitters in the game, including Robbie Lawler. And he's taken multiple shots, and he just keeps coming back like a zombie.
Yeah,
he took one hard shot from Paul, and he went down. And I thought the stoppage was actually correct. He was still wobbling. He didn't make the 10 count. He didn't make it. That's the truth. You know what? You got to be up and ready by 8. If you're not up and ready by 8, they stop it. So generally speaking, a good referee will stop it. So it's a legitimate win. The kid has legitimate power. But the reason why I said what I said was, one, first of all, I don't like talking about PDs because I create so much controversy. But that's what I was asked, and I'm going to give an honest answer.
Yeah.
Why do I say some guys are on PEDs and some guys are not? What's the differential? I always look at the broad picture. I don't just look at one thing. Okay, the guy's got a pimple, is he on PEDs? The guy's muscular, is no. In my opinion, that's not how it's done. You have to look at the training history. Go look back. If the guy had a major leap in ability, not skill necessarily, but ability, then that's very suspect. Why? I've trained thousands of people. I've trained countless pros. I've been training professional fighters for 20 years. Okay, I can tell you that I know the level of growth somebody will go through, and there are exceptions. There are guys who are genetic freaks. Okay, like when I first saw, this is a very important point. When I first saw Ngannou fight Miocic on my podcast, I said, "Look, Ngannou loses." I said, "But it's inevitable. He becomes world champion. It's a matter of time now." Why? Because he has this God-given talent that you can't train for, you can't prepare for, you can't duplicate, is what I'm saying.
Right.
That God-given talent is not going to be stopped by anybody. Now, why did I say that? Because the guy has his God-given talent, but he's still green in terms of skill.
Yeah.
So you could pick out a guy, you could be like, hey, this guy's got 1 or 2 fights, but we see something, a coach will see him a mile away. Like they do when they're scouting for hockey, football, soccer. That guy's got something special. Like, for instance, if you show me McGregor's first fights before I ever knew him, I would tell you that guy's really special. His ability to his eyes, his counter-punching ability, his timing, his reach, okay, the eyes that he has, the reflex, was very, very special. You can't really train that. Okay, you can improve it, but you can't get to that level. If I saw McGregor's first fights, when I first saw his first fight in UFC, I knew he was talented. If you showed me his first fights in Cage Wars or whatever that event was, whatever event he was in, I would tell you that guy's really special. He has something very special. Now, look at Jake Paul's first fight, which was 3 years ago. He looks very novice. His athletic ability is good. It's not great. It's not like it doesn't stick out. There's not something that sticks out like as a thunderous power. His mechanics are off, but that could be fixed. Thunderous power it's a talent. Okay, so sprinting coaches have the best saying. They say, we can't make you fast, we can make you faster. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have to be really, really fast already, and then we can give you a skill that makes you faster. Power is a similar thing. Like, for instance, how did they discover Mike Tyson? He got into a fight in the street. He was a young kid, knocked the guy out with one shot. They're like, hey, this guy's really good. Costa met him, and he's like, hey, this kid hits really hard. I can polish this guy. I can take this God-given talent and take this guy to the moon. Okay, so when you see an amateur fighter 3 years ago, doesn't have the great punching power, doesn't have great skill, and then fast forward in just such a short period of time, in 3 years of training, all of a sudden he's much bigger, much thicker, and he's got thunderous power. Okay, I'm telling you, he's a very effective fighter. He's a dangerous guy.
Mhm.
So if you do that in 3 years, where you started, I don't know if you're familiar with his first opponent. Have you seen his first opponent?
Yeah, against
Complete
KSI's
beginner,
little brother. Yeah.
a complete beginner, a guy who doesn't do any boxing at all. Like he's very novice, like as green as they get. Okay, like, and it was a very 50-50 fight.
Yeah, it wasn't even that one-sided, given that like the level of
No,
guy
it
he
was.
was fighting was like exponentially lower than what he's doing now.
Listen,
You're not
Paul
even
was bleeding by
comparable.
round one, and the other guy was banged up. They were both banged up. It looked like an amateur fight
Yeah.
between two young guys who are getting in the sport. You know, we all started at that level. I'm not knocking them. GSP used to be at that level. Mike Tyson started at the. Everybody starts at the beginner level. You know, nobody starts at black belt. Okay, but you could see that the talent level was good, not great, not phenomenal, just above average. Let's call it above average. It wasn't something so stellar that you're like, hey, in 3 years that guy will be in a mega fight.
Yeah.
So my explanation is that I've seen guys make that kind of leap. I've trained countless fighters, some on gear, some not on gear. Okay, many not on gear, many on gear. And that kind of leap, usually it involves type of gear.
Fair enough. So like obviously my response was more so to like the lack of drug testing. Like it's actually been confirmed there's been no drug testing to date. So not only in your off-season preparation, but the actual leading up to the fight, at least in boxing, they'll typically have VADA enforced, 8-week to 12-week out testing or something for an actual, like pro boxing fight. For Jake and Tyron, it's like 0 up to date.
Well, that's all stipulated in a contract. Like boxing is a very different animal. It's not like UFC. UFC, you have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to be in the testing pool for 6 months before your first fight. In boxing, it's all about the contract. Do we agree to VADA? Do we agree to testing? We don't have to agree. We can only do the state testing, which is mandatory. But the day you're getting tested, right? You'd have to be pretty late, foolish to get caught if you know the day you're getting tested. You're getting tested on a Friday or on a Saturday. So you're getting tested at the weigh-ins or after the fight, or maybe even sometimes before the fight. They call you in, they tell you, hey, don't pee. Or once you get to the locker room, don't pee. Call us when you're gonna pee. And they're not taking blood; they're just taking urine. So it's not the most
broad spectrum way to test them. Yeah.
Right.
So with Woodley, obviously the argument is that because there's such a lack of testing, like Woodley has a lot on the line in terms of his credibility and reputation, I would say. Like if he loses to Paul, who's seen as, like a social media clown still by a lot of people, it doesn't really reflect well on UFC, the MMA world. It kind of makes them look, not as, I don't know, it kind of reflects poorly on his skill set, his elite, history and whatnot. If you lose to Jake Paul, and on the other side of the spectrum, Jake Paul obviously has a lot to gain. And if he loses, were people really expecting him to win anyways? Like, I guess maybe now there's this hype train behind him. So perhaps, maybe there is a bit of disappointment if he loses. Maybe people are a little bit surprised. But in general, I think Woodley's reputation has more to like fall than Jake's does.
Of course.
So I think there's definitely incentive on both sides. But is your pushback to that more so that Woodley doesn't need anything? Like you mentioned how like they both know there's no drug testing essentially. So like, why would they not both be doing something?
Well, the thing is, I don't think Woodley does it. I'll tell you why. Okay, because he has receipts. Okay, we've seen him train and fight for over 10 years, and his progress has been steady. This guy's been training his entire life. Don't forget, like if you show me a guy who's really, really skilled, really, really powerful, really, really explosive, and you tell me, hey, he got there in a short period of time, I think that's suspect. If you tell me he's been training since he's born, since he's Tyron's been wrestling since he's 6 years old. Okay, and it's a very grueling sport, wrestling. Like they build athleticism. It's not uncommon to have a physique like Tyron in the wrestling world. It's not uncommon at all. Okay, so you go to a collegiate wrestling tournament and you're gonna see these kids that are specimens. Why? They're in a highly anaerobic sport and they have to weigh in. So they can't eat junk food. They can't get fat. They're dieting from when they're young, eating clean, and any fat on the body is just pushing you in a higher weight class. So they're highly muscular and they have a great body composition. Okay, and it's a very grueling anaerobic sport. Now, if you look at boxing is much more much more aerobic. Plenty of anaerobic work, but much more aerobic than wrestling comparatively. Okay, so you're doing a lot of jump rope, running, hours of bag and sparring. How do you gain so much muscle and size when you're doing something aerobic? You're doing something so aerobic. And you could say, oh, the guy's young, you know, there's a growth spurt. That's a possibility as well. But generally you won't get huge. And you know about getting big, right?
Yeah.
When you're trying to get big, you're doing the most anaerobic or anabolic workout. You don't want to go anywhere near the catabolic workouts, right? Now, look, his first training camp was in Big Bear. Okay, he's training with Shane Mosley. Are you familiar with Shane Mosley?
Vaguely, but yeah.
Okay, Shane Mosley is notorious in boxing for getting caught. Once upon a time, there's a huge fiasco. He got caught for steroids and EPO. Okay, and he was working with Victor Conte. He tried to say that he didn't know Victor Conte was giving him steroids. He was giving him EPO. And then after that, he recanted that in court, saying, I admit it, you know, I knew what it was, etc. You could look it up. I'm sure you could do plenty of videos on this, but it was a major, major scandal. He beat De La Hoya. You know, De La Hoya was one of the top fighters to ever box. And Mosley beat him, and it was a very, very close fight. He won a split decision. Turned out he busted for PEDs. And that was also a guy working with Jake Paul. So for me, like, I know he's working with that guy. He's training in Big Bear. He went from that fight, his first amateur fight, looking very average and normal, to his first pro fight, looking much bigger, stronger, explosive, knocking a guy down who's much, much better than the first guy he fought.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a year turnaround here. And he's bigger in size, more explosive, just like a whole different caliber of muscle quality. And that tells me, look, you know, I know what goes on in Big Bear. Like, I'm not crazy. Like, I've been in the fight game for a long time.
Yeah.
You don't go train at altitude to get huge. When you train at altitude, you actually get smaller. Why? Because I don't know if you ever trained at altitude, but it's much harder on the cardiovascular system. Your heart has to work faster. So if you run, it's like if you run a mile, it's like you run 1.5 miles. Like, it's much more catabolic.
Yeah.
Much more catabolic than anything else. So you lose weight. It's a great place to lose weight, lose size.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of drugs in all sports, but definitely there's a lot of drugs in combat sports. Now, am I saying I know the guy did it? No, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm just saying, in my opinion, to go from A to B in that short period of time, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as far as Jake Paul. I just think knowingly, I don't know, I can just imagine in Woodley's head, he knows how ridiculous it would look if he loses this, if he gets knocked out, whatever it is, even if he's getting paid a large sum of money, it doesn't reflect well on him in any capacity where he has any kind of excuse other than I got, you know, laid out by a clownish YouTuber, what a lot of people are going to see it as. Yeah. So like, you still think with all that being said, even if historically he's, you know, clean as a whistle, according to USADA, you don't think he would be deploying any sort of assistance, despite the fact that he's just as aware as Jake Paul that there's nothing stopping him from doing it.
When you have a lifetime of training, you have that confidence because his life is fighting. You have to understand, like, he's not scared of Jake Paul at all. Like, he's fought guys. Every guy who's ever fought Woodley, has had at least minimum 10 years of training. In the last 10 years, all of Woodley's opponents have had at least 10 years of training. They were all expert fighters, like guys who've been trained since they can walk. Okay, 10 years is like it's a small amount. They've been training 15 years plus. Okay, he fought Wonderboy. Wonderboy's been training since the age of 3. He fought Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman, who's been wrestling, you know, his entire life. He's fought Gilbert Burns. Like, he's fought guys who are world champion in different arts, in different sports. He's fought monsters. So I don't think he would be like, hey, this time I'm going to get on gear because this guy's really scary. No, I don't think so. I don't think he would go there. You have to understand, he's been hit by the who's who. You know? Right. He's been in there with, you know, guys who would. But again, MMA is even scarier because I'll tell you something. MMA, you're allowed to elbow the guy. You're allowed to kick the guy in the neck with your shin bone. You're allowed to knee his face. I mean, you're allowed to grab the guy his head and knee him in the face. Like, it's a scary sport.
Yeah.
If he went through all that, I don't think he's gonna freak out because he's in a boxing match, to be honest with you. Like, I don't think he would get so overwhelmed by this. I mean, the guy's fought everywhere, you know, and he's fought the who's who. So
fair enough. One thing I wanted to run by you is, so I just put in the chat box, I don't know if you're able to click on that link that I just sent you. It goes to Instagram. Okay, let me know if it opens up. I'm not sure if you're logged in through your desktop to Instagram to be able to see it.
I'm not even sure I can log in. Okay, here, it opened.
Oh, it did? Yeah, okay. So this is Jake Paul's purported hit list where he has his first 3 opponents crossed off, and then he has Woodley next, and then after that he has Canelo Alvarez, Nate or Nick Diaz, Kamaru Usman, Tommy Fury, Tyson Fury's half brother, McGregor, KSI, Gervonta Davis, and then Logan Paul with a question mark beside it. So
Listen, I gotta say he's great at marketing. I love this guy.
Yeah.
I love his marketing. I love what he's doing in the sport. He's bringing money and eyeballs to the sport. It's great. I have nothing against the guy. Okay, I'm all for it. But somebody asked me a question, I give my honest answer.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, like, a great example, actually, if you look at his board, before we get to your question, look at Nate Diaz's career. He started as a guy very average, and he went all the way to beating a world champion. Okay, he beat Conor McGregor, a legitimate world champion. He has a legitimate win over a world champion, over a guy who's supremely talented. If you follow Nate Diaz's career, he didn't go from, you know, let's call it a C+ fighter to an A+ fighter overnight. No, he had a long journey. That's a guy who I bet my life is natural.
Yeah.
I bet my life on it. He's natural. Okay, besides weed and all that, forget all that. No, not real PEDs. This guy's never touched anything yet. And he's a guy who went through white belt to black belt legitimately. And he fought the who's who on the way up, and he fought, and this guy had setbacks, kept coming. And you saw a natural evolution of a guy who's working full-time around his game. He's constantly wrestling, boxing, conditioning. I mean, this guy's a real fighter. And he's gone through an incredible journey, and you see him get better and better as the years come along. And that's what a natural journey looks like from for an average guy. Now you see McGregor, who in my opinion is more talented, even though he loses to Nate Diaz in the future. A more talented guy, you could see him explode, but you saw that talent. A trainer will see, look, this guy is really, really talented. He has something special. He's predisposed to fighting, so therefore he has this advantage. So that's a good, because when I saw the Nate Diaz name, it just kind of popped in my head. That's how an average Joe goes through a career.
Right. If
Paul is ready to fight Woodley after fight 1 looks so amateurish.
Yeah.
Fight 3, he's ready. We all think he's going to give Woodley a good fight because that's what we're all in our heads we're thinking.
Yeah.
How did you get there in 3 years?
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't by doing yoga and having some guy lift you by his feet. That has nothing to do with it, right? And yes, you jump rope. We jump more rope than you. You hit back. We hit more back than you. You hit miss. We hit more miss than you. You sparred. We sparred 10,000. These professionals have sparred 20 years. These guys are just getting in the game, you know. So it's crazy. But sorry, the list.
Yeah, so if he beats Woodley, do you think any of those fights, like besides KSI and his brother, because that's kind of just like, they're not technically like fighters, I guess, like, you know, arguably they are because they've, you know, done well in their social media arranged fights and whatnot, but the actual high level fighters like Canelo, Nate or Nick Diaz, Kamaru Usman, Tommy Fury, McGregor, etc., do you think any of those fights are realistic to happen if he beats Woodley?
No. Canelo's a really bad idea, like really bad. Like I like the fact that he put it on the board. It's fun, it's cool, it's funny, it kind of, but it's not realistic at all because in my opinion, that's gonna be really, really. Don't forget, Canelo's also popped for for substances. Okay, the one reason why we give Paul a chance against Woodley is because he's bigger and stronger. He's not a better boxer than Woodley.
What do you think about the Canelo drug test positive, by the way? Because the clenbuterol thing is pretty iffy, given the presence in the meat contamination in Mexico and whatnot.
It could be. I mean, I don't know, but that's, again, the guy has receipts. He has a lifetime of training.
Yeah, he's
been in the ring. So I don't know. I can't tell you I know, but I know for a fact fighters do it. You know, we have scientific evidence of that. People have been busted. People have admitted to it. You know, like it has happened. So I can't tell you, but that guy, because he has receipts, plus, you know, there's tests that are positive. I don't know the ins and outs of that particular case, but regardless of that, he's a very, very dangerous guy. I mean, he beat Triple G, for goodness sake, you know. I mean, it's just another Nick Diaz, also a bad idea. I mean, those guys are just too far ahead. Kamaru is just like, I don't know. Kamaru, you don't want to say his name. I would leave his name out of the list. But again, I think it's more of a marketing idea, you know, and the whole list is not good.
What do you think is the most realistic one of any on that list?
Oh, KSI, definitely. KSI is doable. Like, I mean, there's, you know, he could fight his brother, he could fight KSI, but I mean, Connor would be, you know, bad idea.
If he beats KSI or his own brother, and then he's going down this hit list, like, of the actual fighters like actual, I don't say it like disrespectfully, I just mean like differentiating between the guys in social media and the guys who are like, professional fighters for a living. Who of that list do you think would make sense next, or would even plausibly agree to step in a ring with him?
I mean, if he beats Woodley, man, I would like to see him fight Nate Diaz. I think they're more similar in size, and it would be a huge payday for Nate, and Nate would sell the fight. It would be brilliant, you know. But I don't think Kamaru, because he's the world champion, I don't think they would let him do it. Conor McGregor is going to be busy with other fights. He's got other mega fights waiting for him. KSI, fighting his own brother, I think will be probably too, people think it's fake. I think KSI and probably Nate Diaz will be great, because I think the Nate Diaz fight would sell probably more than anything else. Maybe Masvidal also will be great because he has the BMF title.
Right.
Maybe they can put that on the line because it's not an official title. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll work something out that's super, marketing friendly. I like these kind of fights, to be honest with you. I like these between MMA fights. We watch these very intriguing boxing fights. I like it. I think it has a place.
So if he loses, do you think the hype train, when it dies down and it's over, if he loses to Woodley, do you think he still has any leverage to finagle like big fights in the future, or what do you think happens?
As long as he fights well.
Okay.
If he fights well, he could fight a loss won't mean nothing. I think it won't mean nothing as long as he takes it well. If he cowers in the corner and runs around in circles, which I don't think he's going to do, then, he'd lose all credibility. But if he stands up there and trades blows and fights and like puts on a good performance, people will watch him again, and we'll support him. We'll push him. He's bringing a lot of big paydays. He's got the views. He's bringing people into combat sports. I like it. I think it's great. I'm really happy that Tyron is making a big payday, and Paul is making a big payday, and everybody on the card. So the fight community, I think we should support him, push it. And so what? He has a loss. Doesn't matter. He's still bringing eyeballs. He's still bringing a production. They put Tyson and Roy Jones together. How complicated that must be, and like for boxing promoters to do that. That would have never happened if it wasn't for this company. So I think it's great. And if you had a Nate Diaz versus a Paul, I think it could be really huge. A Masvidal versus Paul, I think it will be huge. Just the intrigue, intrigue. Doesn't matter who wins. We just want to see, we want to see what happens.
Yeah. Do you think that what he's fighting in right now, essentially he's been unchecked as far as testing parameters? Like this is the most strict it's been, and it's literally like testing you on fight day, essentially at best. Do you think that plays a role in why he does these fights? The fact that he basically can get away with doing whatever he wants? Do you think that if he was under the scrutiny of more like USADA level testing, do you think he would still be trying to go after these big fighters? Or what do you think? Because you think it has a pretty big role on his progression, right?
You know what? He's a real fighter. You know why? He's getting in there with Woodley.
Yeah.
Like this is not a joke. Like he's not taking easy fights. He's not like taking a guy who's a YouTuber. He's taking a real fighter on. So these guys, when you have that kind of warrior spirit, that kind of fight mentality, I don't think he's doing that for the drug test. I don't think he's thinking to himself, "Oh, I can." I don't think that's in his mind. I think he really wants to fight. Fighting is very addictive. Okay, so like anybody who's ever fought and won, it's extremely addictive. It's magnetic. You want to do more of it. And look, he's got the guts to call out the big names. He's doing it. So the fact that he's stepping in with Tyron, I think he has my respect. He's a fighter. He's a real fighter. He's not, this is the real deal, man. Sunday, he's stepping in there. He signed the contract. So,
yeah,
it's a real deal.
What do you think I know you've given your prediction on your AMA, but just for like my audience, how far do you think the fight goes? What do you think is the actual outcome? Because you think he has like some sort of a fighting chance. He's not going to get completely decimated, I'm assuming.
No, I think because he's very strong. He's a very strong guy, and he's never been hurt, so he doesn't know. He doesn't know what it is to get hit. So you have that confidence in you that it can help you, but it can also get you in trouble. I think it's going to be a competitive fight.
Okay. Yeah.
Because Tyron is a great striker, but he's not just a boxer. He was great with kicks, knees, elbows. Like he had a great Muay Thai. He trained with Duke Rufus. So boxing is not his. He's definitely good hands. He's got great hands, but he's more of a Muay Thai guy going into a boxing fight, a wrestler, Muay Thai guy going to a boxing fight. And Jake just does boxing. So I think there's that advantage for Paul, because Paul is used to crouching, slipping, whereas in Muay Thai, if you do that, you get kicked in the neck, you get kneed, you get elbowed. So there's not as much bending at the waist for Woodley's. There are small advantages for Paul, but ultimately Woodley has the greater advantage. Why? He's been fighting at elite levels for a long time. I just think it's going to be competitive because Paul is a very good athlete. He's filled out really. He's very strong, very explosive. He showed a lot of power against Ben Askren. So I think it's going to make it for an intriguing fight. However, these guys can knock each other out at any moment. They both hit really, really hard. They both hit really, really hard.
True. Yeah. I think it'll be closer than people think, perhaps, with Jake Paul. I think a lot of people.
It can end with one punch also. It can also end with one punch.
Yeah.
They both got that power, So
a lot of people are going to want me to ask this is what percentage of UFC fighters do you think are on PEDs now, post-USADA versus pre-USADA, if you had to speculate?
You know what? I asked that same question to Vada once upon a time, and they told me 70% of the roster. This is before USADA. They said like 70% of the roster we estimate is on gear. I would say it's probably 60% now.
You think it's only dropped by 10%?
Yeah, I think guys found new ways to get around it. I think they found new and innovative ways.
Yeah.
And a lot of the guys play the odds. I would think, because they test for 300 different banned substances. You never know what they're going to test. And guys are still getting caught, so if they're still getting caught, it's because they're still doing things, And I feel like, there's a lot more to it, sometimes you get results that are very questionable, but they don't know what to do with it. I don't want to get too much into that. I don't want to get myself in trouble, but there has been some questionable things going on. But I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of money on the table. There's a lot of, like, for instance, when I'll give you one that's really well known is Anderson Silva. When he popped against the Diaz fight, he popped 9 days before the fight still happened.
Yeah.
But he popped 9 days before.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
So you mentioned earlier too, how one of the main points you had before we started this whole thing was how you think Jake Paul, his whole, crusade against underpaying fighters is good for the sport. Like ultimately it might help people, bring more attention to this not often talked about issue potentially. Do you think it's going to eventually be able to swing in favor of MMA fighters getting paid more when he's like putting all this heat on Dana and stuff like that? Or do you think it's going to make a difference?
I mean, I'm not sure on his method of doing it, but the fact that he's getting Woodley in there is because he threw a lot of money at Woodley. Woodley would not entertain this fight.
Yeah.
Unless it was a major payday. I don't know what Woodley's getting paid, but I'm sure it's plenty because he would not have put his time and energy in this fight. I heard Ben Askren made $1 million on that fight. That's amazing.
That's crazy.
I mean, if it's true, I don't know if it is, but if it's true, I'm really happy for him.
Yeah.
And that's a great payday. If Jake Paul is doing that for the sport, he's doing a great thing.
Yeah, I know Paulo Costa was one of the most like outspoken against being annoyed of lack of fighter pay. And I don't know what his like current deal is. Like, I'm pretty sure he's going to be fighting Vettori, I think, pretty soon. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not officially, but I don't know if he's getting paid more for that now or what happened that swung in favor of him actually like, agreeing to something. Do you have any predictions on that fight?
I think Costa wins that fight. It's a tough fight for Vettori. I think Costa, that's another guy. You see what a leap he's made in his career. If you look at his earlier fights, he was more of a grappler who was getting tired and a bit sloppy. And then all of a sudden, one day he's knocking people out in less than a round. Every guy he fights, he's knocking out less than a round. And then, you question his background and you have to speculate. I think that, and Vettori is another guy who's pissed hot in the past.
Yeah.
But I think there's two levels to this, and I think Costa has the edge there.
Yeah, when Costa went into the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, he went in as like a bodybuilder beforehand. Yeah, and like we all know.
I don't know if there's drugs in bodybuilding. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah.
I never seen a bodybuilder eat ice cream. I heard that's the one way you can know that a guy's not on PEDs.
Oh yeah. If you eat like shit, apparently you've never taken drugs before, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't understand. I didn't get.
I'm an Ohio boy and I eat like shit. Therefore, I don't take PEDs. Like, okay, Jake.
Yeah, that's amazing. That was amazing. It was funny. I guess he just didn't know what to say.
No, yeah, like how do you even fucking respond to that, right? It's just like, oh, like you've definitely proven yourself clean, dude. Like, congratulations.
From now on, USADA is testing you. They call you live on Zoom, and you have to eat ice
Yeah,
cream in front of them. If you can't eat ice cream,
yeah, then you're
you
fucked.
pop. We
Yeah.
know, therefore, you're on steroids.
Did
It was
you
a good one.
watch the True Geordie podcast where they kind of like reacted to
No,
your
I watched your reaction only
okay.
to them, so that was funny. Made me
Yeah.
laugh.
So like the guy who was interviewing Paul, he came to the defense. Like I don't know if they're actually friends or not, or if he's just like, being favorable because he's interviewing him, but he's sort of like more on the social media side than the actual, you in the trenches kind of side with actual fighters. So he was saying how he was kind of making a comparison to GSP and saying how GSP, one of the most athletic, jacked looking fighters historically, he was, very successful in a pre-USADA era. And he was saying, if you're in a glass house, don't throw stones. And I thought it was a pretty bold statement to be like, he was basically insinuating that GSP used to take shit, left the UFC when USADA came into the picture. And then who are you, like you, to claim that Jake is on PEDs,
Right.
given the evidence is way more in favor of.
We started the whole testing thing, self-testing.
Yeah.
George hired Vada to test himself and his opponents, paid
Right.
out of pocket. It was an out-of-pocket expense.
Mhm.
It was an out-of-pocket expense. Now, we wanted Johnny Hendricks to test with Vada, and Vada's protocol was that they post the results, no matter what the result is.
Yeah.
They post it. It's out of your hands. Once they test you, that's it. It's completely out of your hands. It's random. It's and I was on the call with the Johnny Hendricks camp. It was me, the UFC, their lawyers, our management from Georgia's team, Johnny Hendricks' management, and we're trying to make a deal where we're all gonna sit down and make sure everybody's happy. And they wouldn't agree to VADA testing. They wanted the Nevada State Commission to test him. Johnny didn't trust nobody with his. They didn't want to do anything with VADA, and UFC didn't want to deal with VADA. I assume there's like a political beef. I offered to pay from my own pocket. George would pay VADA. I would pay the Nevada State to do it. So we'd get private testing from both sides.
Yeah.
And no, they didn't want to. So George ended up testing by himself. He ended up doing VADA testing by himself. Johnny Hendricks did no testing for that fight. And we're all about that. Okay, whenever we're asked to test, listen, I've said this years ago. Okay, when George was in his prime, I said we're ready to do blood testing, blood, hair, and urine anytime. Anybody want to challenge us? Nobody ever took us up on it. We did it. We tested our camp ourselves just to prove to the world. Now here's the thing: George is a freak athlete. Yes, he is. But do me a favor: go see the receipts. Go see his first fight. What age did he start training? Go read his biography. His father was a black belt. He started training since the age of 5. Now, it's not uncommon to train somebody from the age of 5 that he's going to be a ripped freak by the time he's in his 20s. Of course, obviously, the guy literally has 15 years of training under his belt. He started training before puberty. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Tudor Pompa. Tudor Pompa did a massive research on every world champion and what age did they start.
No, I've never seen that.
It's a great book called Periodization, and he starts off explaining to you that he's collected data from all world champions. What age did they start? It's always before, during, or right after puberty, but never too long after puberty. Okay, so you'll never find a gymnast that started training at the age of 20 and made it and won a gold medal. It'll never happen. Why? They all start before puberty. Why? Because there's a lot of theories why, but generally speaking, when you're young, your brain is less wrinkled, and as you age, your brain wrinkles. Okay, it wrinkles to a further degree. Of course, a baby's brain is wrinkled, but it's much smoother compared to an adult brain. You become hardwired. That's why they teach you to read when you're young, because it's very hard to learn to read or a language when you're older.
Yeah.
Like you learn, I don't know if you're whatever languages you learn them just by hearing. You don't know the grammar rules or anything like that. You know them intuitively. If you grew up hearing two or three different languages, like my kids speak 3 languages. Why? They grew up hearing 3 languages. They didn't go to a French and English school before they could speak. They could speak before they went to school. Just by hearing it. If you ask them grammar laws, the rules, they don't know. They don't understand the ins and outs of grammar. However, they can speak the language. So if you learn at a very young age, and different sports have different ideal ages to start, but boxing, if I remember correctly, is around the age of 12 or 13, like just when you hit puberty, not before and not too long after. Now, there are exceptions. You could find a guy, like, for instance, Bernard Hopkins really started boxing at 27.
Mm.
But this guy, you could see right away, this guy was he was a great athlete.
Yeah.
He was a freak athlete. After his first fight, we could tell he was very special. Like an Ngannou, for instance. You know, in Ngannou, he hit the power cube. Okay.
Yeah.
You know the power cube? He hit the power cube. A sledgehammer is 100,000 on the power cube. If you take a sledgehammer and hit the power cube, you'll score about a 100,000 score. Like when I hit the power cube, I hit like 60,000. Okay. Which is like, it's a good punch. It's not a great punch. It's just a good punch. Ngannou hits 240,000.
Jesus Christ.
You understand?
Yeah.
So if he hits you, you're getting hit with a sledgehammer twice. You understand? He's that dangerous. Now, Michael Kogan wrote the best, like one of the best books I've ever seen, I've ever read. Honestly, it's called The New Power Program. He talks about what creates human power. Like, why do some people hit harder than others? Why do some people jump further than others? And number one, it's not a muscle type, fast twitch or slow twitch. It's where your muscle is attached to your bone. Millimeters or miles in this case. So for instance, like if your bone, you know, it's leverage. Like let's say if your bone if your muscle is attached a little further deeper, a little farther on the lever, which is your bone, you'll have more power. You'll create more power. It's like a crane, you know, like a crane, it has to lift at the right spot. There's an increased amount of leverage if your muscle is attached at a certain place in your bone. These things you cannot, you know, by the way, the Germans, the Nazis, they tried to experiment with reattaching muscle to bone, trying to create super soldiers and carry more geared, you know, travel further. They invented drugs, by the way, all these PEDs, they invented it. When there's it's not an accident that the Russians were the best in the Olympics after the Germans. They're the ones, when Berlin fell, the first to get all the data of drugs was Stalin, the Russians. So you have these Germans that were incredible in the Olympics. They were already on PEDs. And then after that, you had a boom in the USSR. They had a boom of athletic performance. Why? They had all the data from the German scientists who invented drug. They invented meth, etc. They invented all sorts of drugs. But still, the number one factor on the list of power is not fast or slow twitch. It's not skill. It's where your muscle is attached to your bone. So if you want to hit like a Mike Tyson and you have the same exact mechanics as a Mike Tyson, you won't hit like a Mike Tyson. Why? Power, like the sprinters say, sprinting coaches say, we can make you faster. We can't make you fast. If Usain Bolt never trained track and field, and I trained my entire life track and field with the best coaches, and me and him lined up in the prime of our athletic fitness, and we ran 100 meters, he would beat me. He would beat me. Why? Because the level of, there's no skill involved. There is some skill to sprinting. I know people are going to jump on me now. They're like, no, sprinting is also skill. Yes, there is some skills to sprinting.
I think everyone knows like generally what you're trying to say.
It's torque. It comes down to torque. Now, for instance, by the way, what's that guy's name? I forget his name. He was a great runner. Anyways, but even Usain Bolt is critiqued for his technique. His running technique is not perfect. However, he's still the fastest guy on the track. Why? It has to do with genetics. He's predisposed for running. Now, if you ask him to run a 100-kilometer race, no, he might not be the best guy. Other guys are more predisposed to that sport. So predisposition has a lot to do with your success. Now, if we're talking about soccer, it's not the fastest guy that's going to win. Now, there are other skills involved. There are other tricks. I can use ball control to beat your speed. I can use all sorts of different, I can use creativity, memorize more plays. MMA is like that. Just because you're more explosive than me doesn't mean you could beat me. I can use my wrestling to wear you down. There's a lot more strategy and skill involved, even though athleticism is still very important. But when it comes to sprinting is highly dependent on your athleticism and not on your skill. It doesn't take me long to teach you how to run.
Right.
You just have to run good enough to beat that guy who has less torque than you.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, definitely. The one thing about the like circling back to the USADA thing, the enactment of it, and kind of the criticisms of GSP and whatnot, like obviously we know your stance essentially, but one thing I found that was interesting was recently, like as of a few days ago, apparently GSP did a podcast where he said not only did Johnny refuse to do the drug testing, but he learned that UFC told Johnny not to do it. apparently.
Yeah, from what I understand, on being on that call, I think there was just a beef between them and Vada. I think I don't want to get too much into it because I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying for being on that call. I think it was privileged, but there was just I think it was just a political thing, and
Okay.
or maybe Johnny's team didn't want to be tested.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
Maybe
he
they were
was
like, "Hey,
definitely
we're
one
not
of the
doing
guys
testing,"
who fell apart after you said
because
it.
he
So it's pretty
agreed to
obvious why he wouldn't want to do it.
he agreed to it at first publicly. He
Mm.
was asked publicly, "Would you do testing?" And he said yes. Done. I was like, I told the George's management, send them the paperwork. Don't even ask. Just send it to them. He said yes. We just have an agreement. Send it to. Let's start VADA right now. And no, we had to get on a call. You know, everybody wanted to meet. And the first thing they told us, well, we're not doing VADA. There's no VADA. So at the end of the day, we said no. We said it publicly. We're doing it. We're going through it. George St-Pierre went through it alone.
Yeah.
They took blood and urine, they tested him at random, and he's the only one who went through it. He kept his word. So for me, you know, I hope that makes everybody happy because what else do you want us to do? And I, for years, asked people who have doubts, test blood, hair, and urine anytime. And nobody ever took me up on it until we tested ourselves, show the world. But here's the thing. If you look at George since he's a young teenager, he was always ripped. He's an ectomorph. Okay, this guy, whether he changes his diet or not, he's still very, very lean. There's about like 20% of the population. We all have a friend like that. He eats whatever he wants and he's still lean. Now, being ectomorph or mesomorph or endomorph is usually upon conception. What part of the fetus, believe this or not, what part of the fetus I'm forgetting, the egg is attached to. So I'm sorry, I read it vaguely once. They were explaining what influences. Of course, your parents, your genetics, so you have more chance to become an ectomorph if both your parents are ectomorph. But if you have a mother that's, let's say, endomorph and your father is mesomorph, what are you going to be? You could be a blend because you could be a blend of the two. However, you can fall endomorph, you can fall mesomorph, you can fall even ectomorph. You have smaller chances of it, but it's still possible. So I mean, they have a science for it. That's not my field, but I've read about it in the past, and it explains a lot. You know, it explains why some people can eat what they want and never gain weight. Now, ectomorphs have a hard time gaining muscle.
Yeah.
So you have two ends of the spectrum: endomorph and ectomorph. Okay, endomorphs gain muscle really, really quickly and fat very quickly. They're usually more like an H. They look like an H. Whereas you have ectomorphs. Ectomorphs usually look more like an I or a V. They have very slender hips, and then they go into a V, or they can have very slender shoulders as well, and they look like an I. The ectomorphs have a hard time gaining muscle, but they're more predisposed to long distance endurance, but also have a hard time gaining fat. Knowing this, we spent a lot of time making George do heavy lifting. Why? Because his weakness is putting on muscle. Now, if you ask George, what's the perfect training regimen? He's going to tell you, oh, Olympic lifting, explosiveness, just explode. But I tell George, that works for you. It doesn't work for that guy. The guy who's an endomorph, the guy who's, let's say, very short and explosive, he needs to hit the track. His weakness is anaerobic endurance and aerobic endurance. That guy, if I make him lift weights, he's going to add 20 pounds. He's going to die at the weigh-in.
Yeah.
You understand? I need to train that guy differently than you. But if you ask George, what's the best thing? Oh, I never run. Only short runs. Only short runs are the best. Yeah, we make George do short runs because it's more anabolic. He's already predisposed to long runs. Like George can run forever. You know, he'll just stop running when he's bored. We wanted to keep muscle. Muscle was always the first priority for George, keeping muscle on his frame. Because if I made George do long hours of training, he would have got he would have lost weight. He would have got small quick.
What did he walk around at? Like, you know how in general, like guys like Costa, they will, cut down to just make weight, and then they'll super compensate up to like 215 when they step in the ring or shortly thereafter. Like, what was George's like super compensation weight that he'd actually walk in the ring at?
He'd fluctuate between 185 and 190, but not much heavier than that. He was not a huge welterweight. Like when he
started his career, what was his kind of like, how much muscle did he gain from the start of his career to like peak prime?
Well, I would say he was pretty stable, but the thing is, we kept the muscle on because don't forget, when you do long hours of training, you can get into a catabolic state where you start to lose muscle. Like boxers, for instance, are not very muscular, but they don't have to wrestle. Again, boxers are muscular, but I'm comparing them to wrestlers now.
Yeah.
And MMA fighters. MMA fighters and wrestlers would generally be more muscular than boxers. Why? Because we have to wrestle, and you need more muscle. It's more ATP, it's more glycogen than aerobic when you're wrestling. It's force against force. So we put a heavy premium on George maintaining his muscle, because fighters can, like, if you look at Nate Diaz, for instance, he's not overly muscular at all.
Yeah.
Why? Well, he does long Ironman workouts, which I think is a problem for him, because he's an ectomorph and he's doing long distance running. Why? I would have him doing the opposite. I would make him do 100-meter, 200-meter sprints. I would have put a lot more muscle on him. That's why, in my opinion, he never developed as a really good wrestler.
Yeah.
Because you're training aerobically, and then when you get into an anaerobic exchange, wrestling exchange, you lose.
Right.
So if you look at Khabib, he's very muscular and he's got a lot of meat on him. That's exactly what a wrestler is supposed to look like. I have to give you that build for you to wrestle. So a Nate Diaz, in my opinion, will never out wrestle a Khabib. Not because of you can make Nate wrestle just as often as Khabib, but he's not built to wrestle. He's built to strike, and that's why he always excels in striking. Striking is more aerobic.
Right.
So he's training aerobically too much. So he's going to fall behind in the anaerobic portion of the MMA fight. Whereas, you have some guys that do the opposite. They lift way too much weight, and when it comes to striking, they're just a little bit slower, a little bit weaker. They get tired from the exchanges. So there's a proper balance. George was always predisposed to striking and aerobic work. So we did the opposite, because George also grew up doing karate.
Right.
So for him, punching and kicking, he was very efficient. He'll never get tired punching and kicking.
It's like one of the things, from what I understood, one of his main motivations to leave the UFC in, I think it was 2013, was the last fight against Hendricks, right? The UFC 167, before he came back in 2017.
No, I think he had 2 ACL tears.
Okay.
I think he had 1 or 2 ACL tears, because he had ACL tears soon after. I can't remember if it was before or after the Johnny Hendrick fight. And just basically, I don't think he had the motivation to keep training like he did.
Okay.
He did do USADA testing when he fought Michael Bisping. He went back into the pool, and he was tested before and after the fight for a prolonged period of time. You have to stay in the pool of testing. So he's done it, and he's been tested in the past as well, testing himself when he fought Johnny. So we're all for USADA. Like nobody, but it was at the tail end of his career. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records for most hours spent in the octagon at that point. I think he got surpassed later by Frankie Edgar, but his knees gave out for him from underneath him. That's the truth. He had 2 ACL tears, and that's a very long journey. That's basically your 6 months in a cast. It's a very, very long journey. And also, he was 30 plus now. He wants to have a, family, he's been fighting full time since he's, I would say, 19. And the UFC, after the Johnny Hendricks fight, they wanted him to fight 3 months later. And he's like, man, he's not going to go back into training camp right away. It's being champion. You have to fight every 3 to 4 months. Yeah. It's a lot of pressure. It's difficult to live that lifestyle. He did it for 9 years straight. Think about it. He had a stellar run. It's got to end sooner or later. Right.
Makes sense. So is one of the main questions too, and this sort of came up in that interview the other day, is he mentioned how the Anderson Silva super fight, when they were in their prime, never happened, partly because UFC did not have strong drug testing procedures at the time. Is that, I can understand why somebody would say that, given that Anderson's popped multiple times now. So maybe that was a smart move to never actually do that. But do you think that was the primary motivation? When you guys talked about it?
Here's the thing. Everybody thinks everybody's on steroids. Everybody thinks so for sure we want testing. For sure we wanted testing. And there's a lot of discussions behind closed doors. Okay, do you guys want to fight? Okay, here's our list of demands for the fight. And they have their list of demands. And one of them for sure was drug testing. George always wants to drug test his opponent. He got to the point where he wanted to drug test everybody, and that includes himself. Yeah. And, I can't go into backroom discussions, but if they don't agree, they don't agree. But that's the way it is. So George was very adamant about his opponents drug testing if they want to fight with it. And especially
presumably Anderson just wasn't on board with the same scrutiny as George.
Everybody has their demands, and that's one of George's demands, that his opponents test on. We wanted to pay out of pocket to have drug testing. Yeah, and he did, and he ended up doing it alone. Think about that. Yeah. If I was Johnny Hendricks, I would have done it out of principle. I can't let my opponent do it alone. Yeah, I have to test too. He's giving blood, hair. Like they weren't taking hair, but it should be hair. In my opinion, it should be blood, hair, and urine. But anyways, I think you shouldn't cut your hair during training camp. You should keep a certain length, etc. But you shouldn't bleach your hair. You shouldn't do it. Like that would be my ideal. Okay, hair and urine, blood and urine, I'll accept. I think that's good enough. We didn't, both sides didn't agree. Let's leave it at that. But we're definitely on board at all times to do drug testing, blood and urine at all times.
So a guy like Anderson, like you mentioned, how you typically look at their training progression and their skill acquisition and their power throughout their career to kind of as a reflection of if they're suspect or not, rather than just, do they have acne? Do they have hair loss? Do they have gynecomastia, et cetera? So for a guy like Anderson, who was popped multiple times, like on the latter half of his career, rather than in his like pinnacle of smoking dudes in like dramatic fashion, do you think his progression is reflective of being on shit like the whole time? Or what do you think for him?
You know what? I'll tell you something. I don't just go by physique. Physique is one factor.
Yeah.
If you put on 20 pounds of muscle in 1 year and you're already a developed athlete, I find that very suspect. I'm not saying he did that. I'm just saying that would be a flag for me. Okay. Because if you take a guy who's never trained a day in his life and you make him lose 10 pounds of fat and put on 20 pounds of muscle, but he had all that potential because the guy's never lifted anything heavier than a paperweight. And you got him deadlifting. Yeah, for sure. You could put on 20 pounds of muscle. Sure. If the guy's been wrestling and kickboxing since he's 10 years old, and now you tell me all of a sudden you put muscle on him like that, it's almost impossible. So musculature is one aspect. Now, I didn't think at that time that Anderson was on PEDs because he has receipts, man. I've seen this guy fight in Brazil. He was a gem. Okay. Like if you look at his early fights, in fights in Brazil, he's fighting in the ring with the like just killers, man. He was a gem. He was very quick. He had amazing eyes. He had the long reach. He was very creative in the ring. The guy was a gem. He was like a Muhammad Ali type of Muay Thai. He had a movement to him that was fluid. That has nothing to do with PEDs. Now, there was an infamous episode of MTV Cribs or something where they go to famous people's houses, and you should look this up because you'll find it, I'm sure. And they went to Anderson Silva's house, and there was like, he opened the cupboard and there was like these needles or something like that. And people like, you got to look it up. Okay, so just Google Cribs, Anderson Silva, PED, and you're going to decide, somebody's going to highlight that picture. Now, when I was really, I was like, nah, that's circumstantial. It could be something else. Maybe somebody in his family is diabetic. Who knows what that is,
Yeah.
It was just like it went in the media. Everybody was talking about it. Now today, because the guy failed, I think two drug tests now, and now I would say, okay, it's very possible. Brazil has a PED culture. They do, all beach cultures. Anywhere where you go, there's a beach.
Yeah.
You're very often going to find steroids or performance-enhancing drugs, like anything to make you ripped and muscular. Why? Because you got to take your shirt off. It's a beach culture. Beach culture, you got to be ripped. If you want to go to the beach, you can't go there, chubby or whatnot. So oftentimes, anywhere you go, California, Florida, Brazil, all places which I love to visit, but you're going to see guys on gear. You're just going to see lots of it. You're going to see women on gear. You know? So this is, I don't know if you know this, but Anavar was legal to buy in Brazil at the pharmacy.
Yeah.
This is like maybe 10, 15 years ago. It wasn't a banned substance. You can literally go buy it over the counter. So he might have grown up around it.
Yeah.
It was just like a normal thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you found what I was talking about, but that was the one thing that people were like, oh, look, he's taking PEDs. But because he had receipts, because he had such a long history of fighting, and you could see his progression was, he was very talented, and he has the fights to back it up.
Yeah.
So, but if you put PEDs on that, then you have a legend on your hands. Then you have a guy who's like doing something special in there,
Yeah. What do you think in general about, because the way USADA, they kind of outsource who randomly tests in certain countries, because it's not like they can physically be present, especially nowadays with everything going on. It's very difficult to be physically present in a lot of these different countries, not just domestically in the States. Do you think there's a lot more leniency for guys who are Brazilian or guys who are...
I heard, yes. I heard that when they went to test Jose Aldo, they called the cops on them. And the cops went and got the sample back, Jose Aldo's sample back. This is when he was fighting McGregor.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we're going to test him. You have no jurisdiction here. You don't have a visa to work here in Brazil. And this is what I heard. This is what I understood. So, and you can tell they're fans of the fighters. And Brazilians, like I love Brazilians, but they're ultra loyal. Like if
Yeah.
you're Brazilian, you're loyal to Brazilians. You know, like they're super ultra loyal. It's a good in one way. It's not so good in this particular instance. Okay, but I do believe, yeah, it will be tougher to test them. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. That's like one of the things that's rough because it's like there's only so many resources for USADA to, you know, aggressively go after people. They can only deploy so much high sensitivity testing to begin with. And then above and beyond that, it's not like they can physically be present worldwide randomly all the time with ease, not get like flagged when they, you know, go through the airport or something and alert the fighter, all this stuff that could go on behind the scenes. Like even McGregor said, some like random Irish company was like coming to test him on behalf of USADA, but it's like it's Irish people testing him. So it's like obviously there could be, yeah, there could be some, you know, behind the scenes fuckery going on.
Listen, there's always Lance Armstrong, he popped, right?
Yeah.
Most tested cyclist Armstrong, he got popped. And he was like the most tested guy on the face of the earth. There's always, whenever there's money, power, fame, there could be corruption. So it's a tough thing to be certain either way. Sometimes you can get away with it. Sometimes you can get a guy who was innocent and, you know, maybe he just had a tainted supplement or a meat or something. It could be. It's not logically impossible. Mm-hmm. So then you gotta look at other factors, and I think you gotta be extra careful with those athletes if they flag and there is a possible, because there's also like tainted supplements. For me, like you might know that supplements already tainted. Like a lot of these supplements are fronts for guys who are selling drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people, I don't think they realize that sometimes reverse engineering which drug you take is based upon, well, if this is tainted with this, how about let's third party test a bunch of supplements, find a tainted one, and then, oh, it has this in it. Maybe I'll start taking that because I have this excuse now of the shit that was tainted. And you can like reverse engineer your drug selection process based on like what is tainted. I don't think a lot of people realize that.
You could have a friend who sells you PEDs and he also sells a powder, protein powder. And you know that the PEDs you take are in that powder as well. So one day when they bust you, be like, hey, that's the powder I take. Maybe it's tainted. They go and they buy them off the shelves. That guy's selling PEDs. His powder is just a front. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they tested, oh yes, it is tainted. Yeah, it's tainted. I knew that. He knew that. And the guy selling me the drugs knew that. We all know that. Yeah. So there are so many ways to get around the testing. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's a game. You know, like, I mean, you should really read up on the Victor Conte Mosley story. It's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, I'm pretty familiar with the Conte one. I just forgot that Mosley worked with him. Like, I forgot all the athlete names. Like, I'm more familiar with the sprinters that worked with him. But like, I'm pretty familiar with, you know, the designer drugs he, you know, had created for him by Patrick Arnold, the kind of way they circumvented testing and whatnot. Very, very interesting shit. Obviously, one of the most insightful stories in, you know, surrounding the PED world.
One interesting case, because we're talking about certainty, right? We know, we're certain that Chael Sonnen, he admitted to it. He was on PEDs when he fought Anderson Silva the first time. Yeah. He tested 17-1. Yeah. Look at that fight. Do you remember watching that fight? It's one of the most epic fights in UFC history. Yeah. He's literally outstriking Anderson, dropping him on the floor. He's just all over him, standing on the ground, just all over him. Then they bust him. And the next fight, he's allowed 6-1. And this time they're more stringent on him. Look at the difference in the fight. Like one fight, he's toying with the guy. He's outstriking. And if you look at the receipts. Yeah. What was Chael Sonnen striking like before? Yeah. Okay, but he was winning only with wrestling. Now he's knocking down Anderson Silva, like he's tagging him. He's just beating, like Anderson Silva has nothing for him. Then they take that away. They bring him back down to 6-1 because it was actually legal back then to be 6-1. I don't know if you know this, but for a while they allowed TRT in UFC legally. Yeah,
and the 6-1 cutoff is like ridiculously lenient in itself.
Yeah, it was just insane. And I didn't even know about that at that point. I was making my guys compete against guys who were on TRT. I didn't even know. I didn't even know it came out later. I'm like, what do you mean? My guy fought, he was on TRT. Yeah. I'm like, what? Nobody told me when you signed the contract. They said, because, you know, they didn't tell me, hey, this guy, by the way, you're fighting is on TRT. I would have been, had a different mind about it. Anyway, so look at the rematch. Now, there's a lot of factors, but one major factor is that he's 6-1 now, not 17-1. Mm-hmm. Look what happened in that fight. He had to revert back to wrestling. The striking exchanges were taken, because when you're on PDs, you can hit harder. You could take more shots. You have much more, I would say, explosiveness, speed. Like you're just at a higher level. You're operating at a higher level. It just goes to show what kind of difference it can make. There we have almost a controlled experiment, almost.
Yeah.
You run it back with half the testosterone, even less than half the TRT, excuse me. It just doesn't give the same effect. Now, of course, it's just one anecdote, but I can give you many. For instance, Sean Shirk got busted.
Oh yeah, that guy was
He
sauced out
couldn't
of his
get in the
fucking
top
mind.
10. What's
Yeah.
that?
I said that guy was sauced out of his mind.
Oh my God. Listen, I
Yeah.
remember one of the guys I was training was fighting him, and they showed me his because they were doing like a countdown show where they film his fighting and then they film like they're showing you everything he does in fights, right? George was fighting him, and another guy was also fighting him throughout the years. And I was watching his training. He did three anaerobic trainings in a day. He did mitts and double leg drills, like a really aggressive. And he did like a caveman training, basically circuit training. And then at night he went to run hills with weight training. There's not enough testosterone in a human body.
Yeah.
It would be counterproductive.
Yeah.
You would get weaker if you train like that naturally. You would get weaker.
Yeah.
Now, maybe he's a genetic freak, possible. Let me see the receipts. I go back, look. The guy was a very normal looking human being growing up. You know, the guy was on so much steroids. After they busted him, he couldn't win a fight in the top 10.
Yeah.
The guy who was taking everybody down, never slowed down even the slightest bit. All of a sudden, he's struggling with a guy who's ranked number 8.
Yeah.
Tim Sylvia is another great example. Tim Sylvia I think he knocked out like, I can't remember, like 9 or 10 guys in a row. He wins the world title, knocks out Rico Rodriguez with a one shot, touch of death, just dropping guys. Then he gets busted, gets cut from UFC. The guy's just not able to maintain. He's not able to even stay at that level. He's not even able to stay inside UFC. He gets knocked out later on by Rick Mercer with one punch, a 45-year-old ex-boxer with literally one punch. What happened to that guy who was landing one shot, one kill?
Yeah.
By punching.
The Thiago Alves before and after, pretty dramatic too.
Oh
yeah.
my God.
That one was hectic.
There's a lot of night and day. It's like, look, if you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, a legitimate black belt, you don't just fall off. You don't go from black belt to blue belt level. You don't fall off that far. You have 10 years of intensive study. You don't, if you're a PhD in math, you don't just wake up one morning and you forget everything you know about arithmetic.
Yeah.
Like it would be a slow decline. If you have a quick drop in skill, something is wrong, man. You're missing a fundamental part. For instance, if you train somebody in boxing on PEDs, they're not going to have the same movement and skill they would have if they were off PEDs. Why? Because they prefer going toe to toe. They're bigger and stronger, so they develop a style that reflects what assets they carry with them.
Right.
Like a great example of this is Rigondeaux. Rigondeaux, one of the best boxers to ever come out of Cuba. He won 200 fights in a row. Listen to this, okay? Amateur boxer in Cuba. Look how special this guy is. He won 200 fights in a row, lost one, and then went on to win 200 more fights in a row in Cuba. You understand? Like, Cubans are the best boxers, and this guy won 200 fights in a row twice.
Yeah.
But he's notorious for having the weakest chin ever.
Yeah.
Freddie Roach trained him. I never got to work with Rigondeaux. I'm not in that boxing world, but he told me he has the greatest defense he's ever seen. This is what Freddie Roach told me about Rigondeaux. The greatest defensive fighter he's ever seen. And look at Rigondeaux's first fight. This is how amazing this guy is. His first fight in America, he's just toying with this fighter, just toying with the guy. And then his cornerman's saying, like, you got to go after him now, put on a show for the Americans, you know, because Cubans are sometimes heavily criticized. They're often criticized for like a boring style of just like perfect point boxing.
Yeah.
He's like, no, put on a show so we get that big money. Okay. He goes in there and kind of starts slugging with this guy that he's just annihilating. The guy hits him with a jab and drops Rigondeaux. Now, Rigondeaux hasn't been dropped in 200 fights. And this guy, who we don't know his name, just dropped Rigondeaux. Why? Because Rigondeaux abandoned his skill. And he's like, let me duke it out with this guy. Yeah. That's how poor his chin is. He's known for having a glass chin, but good luck trying to hit it. Yeah. Now, if you put Rigondeaux on PEDs and he could take more of a shot, he probably wouldn't have developed that sophisticated defense that he did in his entire career, because he realized his chin was frail. So he developed an entire system to keep his chin from getting touched.
Yeah.
And you see in his first pro fight, you see exactly, he gets dropped by a jab, which is very rare. You get dropped by a jab. Usually it's a hook or a cross or an uppercut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder how many guys develop their fighting style just purely based off the anabolics are exposed to. Like Costa's fighting style, for example, like he's definitely improved in all the aspects you talk about in your AMA. Like you're one of the people who I referenced in my kind of speculation about his use versus not, but he has like a very just like he abandoned this during his Adesanya fight, obviously, but prior to that, it was just like push forward, aggressive as fuck, just like the most testosterone style fighting you could possibly imagine. You know,
Rock 'em, sock 'em.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, here's the thing: if I can't teach a regular Joe to do what you do,
yeah,
I have to ask myself why. Well, in the case of Costa, I would say it's torque. If you try to fight like Costa and you don't have his torque, it won't work for you.
Right.
If you don't have the ability to absorb shots like he does, it won't work for you. So you could say that about almost any style, but there's a raw talent there or a synthetic talent that we need to cultivate, because if it's not there, the system doesn't work. It relies on this. So that's why I don't believe there's one fighting style for everybody, because everybody has different traits. Everybody has different gifts, and some men's talent is based on synthetics. If I take away the synthetic hormones that they take, their style falls apart.
Yeah.
And we've seen that after USADA. We've seen guys, I don't want to name names, but we've seen guys who were elite, can't beat a guy in the top 10 now, but they were in the elite 1%. Now they can't even beat a guy in the top 10.
Yeah.
It's completely fallen off.
Yeah. With touching on the whole Costa, like I mentioned the Adesanya fight briefly, do you think if he stuck to his original game plan, it would have gone well? Actually, obviously his game plan was a bit different than what his normal fighting style is, but do you think if he did his traditional grind forward, just super aggressive, testosterone?
I think he tried, but he couldn't on Adesanya. Adesanya's lateral movement and switching of stance was too much, and the kicks were below Costa's radar.
Right.
The kicks were in and out, hitting their target before Costa could even react. That was one of the most masterful performances I've ever seen. I gotta say, Adesanya, when he beat Costa, I believe it was his 100th win. He's got the receipts for it. Okay, that's a lifetime of training, a lifetime of precision, practicing of precision. Those kicks were surgical, and then he ended up landing the combinations with the hands. But in my opinion, the whole setup with the hands was done with the kicks, and the kicks were below the radar of Costa. Costa was getting hit without even seeing the shot coming at him. So in my opinion, he was a sitting duck trying to. That's true martial art. That's a true matador.
Yeah,
he was in and out in a way at an angle that Costa couldn't deal with, and torque didn't matter. That's the ultimate goal of martial arts. We're trying to put torque in the back seat. Now, it's not jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and boxing is not perfect. Torque is still a factor until we understand martial arts better at a higher level. Torque is still a factor. One day, torque won't be a factor if we keep pushing the envelope of martial arts skill.
Do you think if they run that fight back, same thing happens?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, even worse, I think. Honestly, even worse.
Because ultimately, I guess that's his goal, to get back to that spot again. But I don't know if he what he could really fix. Like, he got dismantled,
Yeah, I don't think he ever beats Adesanya, to be honest with
you. Okay, so one thing about the Adesanya thing that's notable is during that fight, he had the most brutal gynecomastia ever, and it caused a lot of people were like, "You think Costa's on gear? Look at Adesanya's titty right now."
Oh my God! Explain that to me.
Okay, so there's ultimately it's like a hormonal input kind of equation where if you have a lack of testosterone relative to your estrogen, or any kind of imbalance as a result of, in general, PED use, you will end up in a position where you're estrogen dominant and you can have glandular development. And for him, the onset was so aggressive and fast that it's really hard to kind of allocate it to anything else other than that. Now, he claims it was his copious marijuana use, which can have some stimulatory input on breast tissue development. But for a guy who's been smoking weed for years, would it have happened so suddenly and the onset to be so aggressive? Like, he literally went from essentially nothing to within 6 to 8 months seemingly having a giant tit. So for me, the kind of hormonal equation thing, it's kind of hard for him to skirt around that. And
I've never seen a guy. Many guys smoke weed, and I never seen a guy hanging with gynomastia, and I never seen that from weed. I mean, is that a thing? I've never heard of that.
I
From
think
weed?
it can inhibit your testosterone production to some extent. It can have a little bit of it can push you in the towards developing it, but not in such a dramatic fashion that you develop it kind of out of nowhere, I feel like. So it's really hard to justify and give him the benefit of the doubt. Although historically, it does not really seem like he aligns with a guy who you would traditionally think like, oh, this guy's on PEDs. Physique hasn't changed substantially. You know, his skill development, I think everything looks pretty aligned with what you would say is, you know, natural, right? Or what would you think in that regard?
You know, the thing is, physique is just one factor. If he's taking gear and he's doing a lot of aerobic work, he's
Yeah,
not
it
gonna
doesn't
put on
mean he's
muscle.
gonna.
He's not gonna put on muscle. And
Yeah.
everybody, you know, some guys take gear and they balloon up, and some guys take gear and they get more ripped. They don't really balloon up as much. It also depends on your diet. He's also very ectomorph. You know, so I don't know. I've never heard of a guy smoking weed and getting a tit. Personally, I've never heard that. I saw one doctor trying to break it down and said maybe he got hit and the soft tissue was.
No,
Dude,
that was.
I don't think so, man. I don't
That
think
doctor
that's
was. I had like a big kind of bad. That guy got a lot of heat after he put out his video because he basically came out with a totally incorrect statement and said it's very rare to get unilateral gynecomastia development where you only have like one side, and it's like that. That's the most common type of gyno in guys who are using steroids.
Is it?
Yeah, you will typically get asymmetrical gyno development. So for him, he kind of like fucked his own credibility.
A lot of doctors don't know. A lot of doctors don't know because they're not trained in that per se. They're not trained in working in gear. They might not know. You know, they're trained in certain realms, and they went out of their wheelhouse, and all of a sudden they're making mistakes because they probably, you know, just repeat what they've heard over the years. Just because you're a doctor doesn't mean you're an expert in all medical aspects of medicine.
Yeah, that was one of the things because I got a lot of pushback on my video because it was like this doctor came out and said this, and you're wrong because he's a doctor. I was like, bro, get the fuck out of here. So
you'd be amazed how many things doctors don't know. Even basic nutrition, sometimes they don't know. It's like,
oh yeah, man, yeah, it's brutal. Some of
but they're not trained in nutrition. They're not trained in gear. They're not trained in PEDs. They're not trained in these things. So they have to research it like everybody else almost. You know, of course they have a better understanding of the body, but if they're not in it, if they're not. Like some doctors deal gear, some doctors give gear to their patients. They think it's good and they have a different philosophy, and that's how they practice medicine. I know doctors who take gear themselves. They think it keeps them healthier and stronger. But if you're not in that world, you might not know. But it was very, very peculiar to me that he had a gynomastia, like he had gyno that fast, that quick, all of a sudden.
It's still there too. It's still there.
It's insane. It's insane. Actually. Quite insane.
Yeah, and it's funny because he brushes it off too, because like obviously who wants to talk about that? I guess like if you're in a press conference and reporters are asking you about your tit, like who wants to address that, right? But
look, here's a good so we could be certain. Let's talk about a case that we know it's a matter of fact. It's not a matter of speculation. Like if we look at Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson, early on in his career, he was known as Decision Dan.
Yeah.
Why? Dan Henderson, one of the greatest fighters to ever do it, he would always go to decision. Always. Then he gets TRT exemption. He gets on TRT. His physique doesn't change much. Not a huge change in physique. He was always very muscular. He comes from a wrestling background. But all of a sudden now we're calling him, his new nickname is the H-bomb. He's knocking guys out silly with a right hand, out. He always had a good right hand. When he fought Vanderlei Silva, he rocked Vanderlei Silva with the right hand, but he didn't put him out.
Yeah.
And he never had a good left hand at all. And if you saw him hitting boxing mitts, he didn't look smooth at all. He was kind of more of a tough wrestler. Fast forward, he gets a TRT exemption. Of course, they're not going to stay at 6-1. You only have to test 6-1 on the week of the fight.
Yeah.
You could be 20-1 through training camp. You know, of course, you could train harder. You take more bone mass, musculature increases. You could train longer hours. You could put yourself through more strenuous training and recover. So this guy now, all of a sudden, he's the H-bomb. Not only does he have an explosive right hand that could knock you out at silly. I don't know if you saw the Bisping knockout. He knocked out.
Oh yeah, that was intense.
Very badly.
Yeah.
Now he knocked out Vanderlei Silva in the rematch because the first time he fought Vanderlei Silva, he got a complete beating. You know, he had a few moments, but he got beat bad. On the rematch, he kills Vanderlei Silva with a left hook. Now he's never hurt anybody with his left hook ever. All of a sudden, he's got 2 H-bombs. He's got 2 powerful one touch, one kill type shots.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? His punching mechanics. And believe me, I'm an expert in body mechanics when it comes to martial arts. Like that's what I do for a living. Okay?
Yeah.
Fighting is what I do for a living. his mechanics are not any better. Where did
Yeah.
this power come from? Where did this surge of extreme power? Hormones make a difference. Look at the current weightlifting champion in women's division. The guy couldn't place even in the men's. He wouldn't be in the top 100 in the men. And now all of a sudden he gets a sex change and he's the best in women's. Like, is that insane?
Yeah.
Why do you think it is? Because he improved his technique on his clean and jerk? No, it's because he's been a man his entire life.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
been, you know,
that True Geordie guy, like in his kind of comparison of GSP and Jake Paul, and him saying, oh, GSP's jacked, Jake Paul's not. His physique is not, reflective of a guy on PEDs. I don't think a lot of people, even at TRT levels, like forget the fact that Jake could take whatever the fuck he wants because he's not being tested at all. But even at TRT levels, oxygen carrying capacity is increased, motor unit recruitment is increased, your ability to recover. And as well, if you have like a hard training session or even are overtraining, the average guy is going to have their testosterone nuked into the ground. You're going to be walking around like borderline hypogonadal with that much intensive training in an MMA capacity. Whereas a guy on TRT, you could literally go drink, eat like shit, train however you want. And your level is manually maintained and stable. It does not dip up and down. Even a natural peak hormone production, if they weren't training at all and subjecting themselves to this very strenuous activity, they would at best for maybe like a handful of hours of the day, maybe have like an 800 nanogram per deciliter total, and then it'll dip down like a diurnal rhythm. Whereas a guy on TRT, you're manually maintaining it stably at like 1,000 and never having to deal with any dips whatsoever, regardless of what you're subjecting yourself to. So above and beyond the fact that on paper, your levels look natural, the performance enhancing advantage of TRT is fucking massive.
Exactly. Here's what you should never forget. It's stress plus recovery equals adaptation. You have to have stress. You trained, you stressed your body, you recover, and then you have an adaptation. You're a little bit better than before. That adaptation period is a rest. I have to push pause.
Yeah.
Not so if I take synthetic steroids, not as much. Why? Because I depleted my testosterone, I depleted my hormones when I stressed my body.
Yeah.
Now I have to eat, sleep, rest, let them come back up to what they used to be. And now I have super compensation.
Yeah.
I'm better than I was before. But that cycle takes time and you got to repeat it over years.
If you look in studies of natural bodybuilders who cut for competitions, and we all know how aggressively guys in the UFC weight cut, the amount of hormone diminishment you get from weight cutting, it can take months to get that back up to baseline. It's not like you have a good night of sleep and you're back up to baseline. Like you're fucked for that entire weight cut. You're at like very suboptimal levels versus the guy on TRT peaked the entire time.
Exactly. Yeah. The strongest gym in the world is Westside Barbell.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, you gotta max out every week.
Yeah.
Now we have control studies where if you max out week 1, week 2, you're a little bit stronger. What max out means you bench your maximum weight. Okay?
Yeah.
Week 2, you're a little bit stronger. Week 3, you max out again. Week 2, you're a little bit stronger. Week 3, you're a little bit stronger than week 2. Week 4, you're weaker than week 1. Why? They call it CNS overload. Your body has to go through a resting period. You cannot max out more than 3 weeks in a row. So some people, they have a 3-week program. The 4th week is a Terry week. And then the week 5, you start again, a new cycle. Okay, makes sense. He says you got to max out every week. How does that work? Well, they're on PEDs.
Hell of shit. Yeah.
He wrote an article. What's the best way to recover from your workout? Number 1, PEDs. He's open about it. About it.
Yeah.
How are you going to max out every week if you're not on PEDs? That's what people need to understand. I can get to where I need to be a lot faster.
Yeah.
If I can inject testosterone in my system.
Yeah.
Why? Because it would be counterproductive for me to keep working when my testosterone is depleted.
Yeah.
Now I go in a catabolic state and eat up the muscle that I've been trying to build. I need that muscle to do these movements. I'm shooting myself in the foot. That's why I'm saying when you show me a Tyron Woodley, you need to show me also he was training since he's very young, or he was that athletically gifted when he was very young, and he has those receipts. That's why Tyron Woodley didn't get where he is overnight. He didn't. I'm sorry. He's got the receipts. Now I've seen guys get really good in 5 years. Let's say get their black belt in 5 years, whatnot. It's nowadays it's generally because of PEDs. There was a time where jiu-jitsu was so unknown. It was such a underground martial art that in 5 years you were comparative to the rest of the jiu-jitsu world a black belt, because it goes by comparison. Like if you could beat a brown belt, you're a higher level. Okay, we give you a black belt. So that's part of the equation of how we give you belt. Today, if you're going to get a black belt in 5 years, man, it's almost impossible. Why? The information is out there. So everybody's doing jiu-jitsu. And the guys who get their black belt in 5 years are usually on a lot of gear. Like I haven't seen a single case in the last 10 years that the guy's not on a lot of gear. Because your body can't take that much training without breaking down.
Yeah. Competitively in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it seems to be one of the most drug-ridden
sports.
God.
Oh my God. It's worse than MMA.
Oh,
it's worse than MMA. You
Yeah.
got guys going in like local tournaments, blue belt level, and they're jacked out of their mind and they're wrestling some little kid. It's like, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's insane. Like, and the thing is, their jiu-jitsu is ugly. Like to me, when I see their jiu-jitsu, it's just tough. It's just brutish. It's not sophisticated at all, but they don't know it. They think their jiu-jitsu is the same as that other guy. Why? Because it's effective. There's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah.
Like for instance, there's a guy named Paul Harris in our sport, MMA. Okay. He would just drop down, grab a guy's ankle and rip it off. Now the guy was effective, but his jiu-jitsu was not sophisticated, in my opinion. It was good, but it wasn't as refined as other practitioners. Now I always said, in my opinion, I thought he was on PEDs. Then later on, he got busted. He got busted on PEDs. Why? Because the way he's torquing the ankle is not correct, but the ankle still broke. Yeah, but it won't work for you if you're not as torqued as him, if you're not as jacked and powerful as him. I wouldn't trust that. Like if you grab my ankle, I would tap because the guy's strong enough. Doesn't mean he knows how to maximize leverage. That's a whole other topic.
What do you think about guys like, are you familiar with Gordon Ryan? He's like one of the
Of course, I've trained with him for many years. He's actually, I know him very well.
So like, what do you think about, I don't know what his goals are specifically, because I know he's dealing with a lot of GI issues right now, trying to just get back to work, like being able to train properly and, compete at a high level again. I don't know. Do you know if his goals long-term are to get involved in MMA? And if so, do you think that's a avenue that a guy going from a pure BJJ background can transition to well, especially given the, reputation of the drug use in BJJ relative to MMA?
Well, we're both black belts under John Danaher. Okay, so I grew up training under John, and then Gordon's like the generation after.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know him well. I know him since he's very young. He's a very, very intelligent guy. If he puts his mind to MMA, he can do it. Especially with John in his corner, John Danaher, which is, in my opinion, the greatest jiu-jitsu mind ever. He's changed the face of jiu-jitsu. He's created so many innovations. All the trends of jiu-jitsu today are a lot of them come from him. A lot, not all, but a lot. If he really puts his mind to it, he can go very far. Will he do it? Because in my opinion, he's making so much and doing so well in jiu-jitsu right now that to start back at the bottom of the totem pole might not be something that's financially the best, because right now he's at the top of the jiu-jitsu world. He's arguably the greatest jiu-jitsu guy ever, Gordon Ryan. Yeah. And I think he could cement that and just, be that legend in the sport.
Not directly comparable, because obviously Askren did compete in another like MMA league, and he wasn't like, a pure, like he wrestled was his main kind of like vector of, beating guys, but he sort of had like a similar kind of situation where he was like the peak of his smaller niche. And then when he went into the big leagues, it didn't exactly work out well for him, and it probably like besmirched his career, to some extent. Do you think that's a potential risk for Gordon Ryan that may sway his decision to?
Yeah, because you know what the thing is, MMA there are more complicated things in MMA. And MMA, there's striking, and the thing is, I'm sure he could figure out striking. I'm sure he can get really sophisticated with striking. But the thing is, with striking, it also has a lot more to do with natural ability and your ability to absorb a shot. Now, here's the thing.
Right.
We never know. You never know by looking at a guy how well he could take a shot, because obviously you don't want to take shots, but you're going to take shots. You got to make your peace with that. If you're going to fight MMA, there's no guy in the sport who went to the highest level who never got hit. Now, some guys have great jaws and some guys have glass jaws. If you go into another sport and you find out you have a glass jaw, well, guess what? It's going to be really complicated to make it to the top. So there's a lot of question marks. We don't know, so there's been some guys who've made the transition and it didn't go well. Like, for instance, I'll give you a great example. Marcelo Garcia, arguably the greatest jiu-jitsu guy ever. He tried to make a transition to MMA. It didn't go well for him. But why? He just never took to the striking. Why? That's kind of complicated. It just didn't go well for him. And he in one of his fights, he takes a guy down on the ground and gets his back. So he's in the best jiu-jitsu position you could be in. And he couldn't finish the guy for like 8 minutes. where usually he only takes a handful of seconds to tap somebody out from that position.
Mhm.
What was the difference? If I put that guy with Marcelo Garcia in that position on the mat in a grappling scenario, he would choke him out. It wouldn't take it long.
Mhm.
I guarantee you it. However, in an MMA scenario, it wasn't working for him. Why? In my opinion, it was the stress of maybe getting stood back up, the stress of like, being in a new environment, trying to process what's going on. The guy's kind of punching you at the same time. He's not reacting the same way as a jiu-jitsu guy. So there are all these unknowns that we don't know until we get them in the water, so to speak. We got to get them in the water and see, because a lot of the guys also buckle under the pressure. I'm not saying Gordon would or would not. I don't know. That's what I want to find out. Because that guy across the ring from me is allowed to hit me as hard as he wants. There's a psychological pressure and reality that people don't know unless they fought.
Yeah.
When you're sitting down on the couch watching a fight, I always tell people people always like, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do
Yeah.
that?
I would love
I
to
would
see you in that
love
position.
to
Yeah.
feel the pain and fatigue he's feeling
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Like I wish, there's a virtual reality where you pick a fighter and you're going to feel whatever that guy's feeling, the fear he's feeling, the
Yeah.
nerves, his legs are numb. He got hit in the jaw. Maybe his jaw's cracked. Maybe he got hit to the body. His rib is really out of place. And he can barely breathe. That all affects the decisions he's making. People are like, it's so obvious. You just should have shot a takedown. It's like, dude, it ain't that easy.
Yeah.
Maybe he was worried about the knee. Maybe he got hit with an elbow. Sometimes guys get hit in the octagon and people don't really notice because it's not them getting hit, but that guy got tagged.
Yeah.
Sometimes guys get tagged with a little elbow. People think it's not much, but look at the way the guy's reacting. It is actually something. So people don't know it. Fighting is very complicated, man. And that's why when I see people in the street starting a fight, I'm like, dude, you don't know what you're getting into. Let's try to walk. Let's try to part ways, man. Fighting is a dangerous thing, man. You don't want to be fighting. It's not something you should take lightly. I've seen people get really, really hurt in fights, really hurt badly.
Do you know what Gordon's goals are by chance? Like you're relatively like familiar with him, obviously.
I know ultimately he wanted to do MMA.
Mhm.
I haven't talked to him in a while, but I think he's having so much. It's jiu-jitsu so hot for him right now. He's selling instructionals. He's the number one instructional. Him and John and they're doing amazing there. I think they should just I think they're probably just gonna dominate the jiu-jitsu world, make their mark as the greatest jiu-jitsu team ever.
Mhm.
And that's something that I think is just as important as a UFC world title for them, because it's really, they're at the forefront of jiu-jitsu.
Right.
It's really, really special because he's a no-gi guy. Because, before they used to tell us you have to do the gi. Gordon is the first no-gi guy to beat all the gi guys.
Yeah.
In Abu Dhabi. Like he didn't just beat them, he just like crushed them.
Mhm.
Like he's devastated the no-gi world. And now he's basically he's almost creating a divide like judo and wrestling. Imagine there was a time where judokas with the gi would take it off and win all the wrestling tournaments, and now they can't. The guys who were freestyle wrestling their whole career, you never see a judo guy win in freestyle Olympic gold.
Okay.
You never see it. Okay, doesn't exist. The objective is the same: put you on your back, throw you. But you have a gi that changes the entire game. In jiu-jitsu, it was medley together for a while, but John and me would always say, look, that's going to change over time because they're two different worlds. To learn the gi, there's an opportunity cost.
Right.
And because there are things that don't work with the gi and no gi. So anyways, basically no gi and gi are about to break paths in jiu-jitsu. And Gordon and John are a big part of that break. Because Gordon's not known for gi. He doesn't do gi. He's never won a world title in gi.
Mm-hmm.
He's the first guy to go to that level without the gi.
Right.
Like legendary status. All the other legends had championships in gi also. The sport is changing. Jiu-jitsu is growing. Mark my words, one day jiu-jitsu will be the most dominant sport in MMA. Again, like it was in the past. Okay. Jiu-jitsu is innovating and growing at such a rapid rate. It's the youngest of the sports. So boxing's been around forever. Muay Thai's been around forever. Wrestling's been around forever. It's so refined. There's no room for wacky innovations. Mm-hmm. Jiu-jitsu is so young. What we're doing today is so different than what we were doing 5 years ago. The guillotines we were doing 5 years ago were lame compared to what we're doing today. The takedowns, the arm bars, everything has changed. All the subs have become more sophisticated. Mm-hmm. All the entries, the sliding into the legs, into leg. Of course, the leg locks have taken a major leap in innovation. The future of jiu-jitsu is looking super bright. there's gonna be a day where if you touch a jiu-jitsu guy, you try to take him down, he's gonna sub you right away. The innovations are coming fast.
Yeah. It should be interesting to see where it goes. I don't know. Like, you think, like, obviously, objectively, I don't have enough experience to really make a comment on it, but it seems like if you're at the peak of your sport and then you try to go to something you could high risk as hell and completely compromise like everything you've worked towards potentially, like, I don't know. Is it worth all the brain damage and shit too,
Maybe
potentially?
maybe they make him an offer, a contract that secures, this is what you would have made in jiu-jitsu. Well, here's a contract that's, a little more than that coming to our sport. It could be, you never know.
Yeah.
You never know. Maybe he makes so much money. He's like, hey, let me take a crack at MMA. But I think it's not just money, it's a status. John and Gordon are doing something extremely special in jiu-jitsu. They're really like re-innovating jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. What'd you think of the Logan Paul Floyd Mayweather fight?
You know what? That's what Ben Askren should have done to Jake Paul.
Yeah.
Tie him up, wrestle him, tie him up. Why the hell? I love Ben Askren. I think he's a brilliant fighter. But I think he underestimated Jake Paul.
Yeah.
And Woodley's going to benefit from that greatly because Woodley's taking Jake Paul seriously.
Yeah.
And I think Askren unfortunately didn't, and that's why he paid the price. He put his chin up and his left hand down, which should have been the opposite. His chin had to be down, his left hand up. And he has very, very competent trainers, and he knows this. Ben Askren is a very intelligent guy. I think if Ben Askren went in there with the fear of losing, he could have actually come out on top. I think Ben Askren could have done a lot better than what he did. Now, look, making no excuses. The guy had a hip surgery. He didn't look like he's in great shape, to be honest with you. He didn't look like he's in great shape. But still, he lost fair and square. Jake Paul beat him. Jake Paul did what he had to do. I mean, after that fight, I went on air. I did my podcast. I said, look, I take Jake Paul seriously as a serious fighter. We all have to.
Yeah.
He knocked out a guy that many guys hit on the chin and couldn't put away. And he put him away with style and quick and easy.
Yeah.
So we got to take him serious. And I think Woodley is. And this is the first gunfight we're going to see Jake Paul in.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see it. Now, a lot of people want to see him go down. I just want to see how good he is. And I think Woodley's going to answer that question. Whether he wins or loses, we're going to know how good he is.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. I want to find out.
I guess Logan, to me, he probably looks more impressive when he's fighting than Jake, although I don't necessarily know that he's more effective in the ring, especially given the fact that he has never won a fight ever. And I don't know, what do you think is next for him? Like the Floyd fight, I guess it was impressive that he survived. I don't know.
Listen, he just wrestled him the whole time. The referee could have made a huge difference. If the referee took away a point or stopped the clinching right away, the guy, he clinched the whole time. He did exactly what Ben Askren should have done.
Yeah.
And kind of wear out Jake and see what Jake has in the later rounds. That could have been interesting, but he didn't. It was a wrestling match. Honestly, I didn't watch the whole thing. I just kind of fast forward. It was just too much clinching. I was like, I know exactly what they're doing. And Mayweather's a much smaller guy than Logan Paul. I mean, that's the end of the day. But Logan, hats off to him. He survived 8 rounds with the man. He survived 8 rounds. But if they actually boxed, it would have been a different story.
I think when he's not gassed out, which for him, I don't know if it's just because his muscle mass, his lack of his general size, obviously his oxygen carrying capacity is nowhere near somebody like Mayweather. What do you think happens if Logan ever stepped in the ring with Jake, given their current skill set?
I think Jake is just mentally tougher. I'm sure Logan is really mental. I mean, he got in there with Mayweather, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
I just feel that it's hard to quantify, but Jake has more of a killer instinct. Again, I'm just speculating here, but Jake, I'm impressed with his ability to pull the trigger, whereas Logan, I think he would. He's thinking too much. He's not reacting like Jake. He's not. So by that I mean he's not well rehearsed enough, like Jake. Because I saw his fight with KSI. I saw both of them.
Yeah.
And the first fight, he had the first few rounds in the bag. He started to fade.
Yeah.
Second fight, I felt like he wasn't adapting to KSI. Whereas we've seen very little of Jake Paul.
Yeah.
But he's been so perfect in that very little that he finds that little window and he pulls the trigger. He's great at pulling the trigger in that little window, which is something very special in a fighter. It reminds me, McGregor was always great at that. If you give McGregor the smallest window, he'll destroy you. It's just he's so good because punching happens in a blink of an eye. You throw a punch, you got milliseconds to react, and some guys have such great reaction. And Jake Paul's one of those guys.
Yeah, I think in sparring sessions and whatnot, Logan just looks objectively more impressive to the layman because he's so athletic. But in the actual ring, in a real fight, Jake is like obviously more effective, proven to date. So,
yeah,
if
but then again, he didn't fight Mayweather, right? I mean,
sure.
Logan Paul fought a much tougher guy.
Yeah.
But the KSI, I'm referring more to the KSI fights because the thing is, boxing, there's a game of adaptation. You do one thing in round 2 and you do something else in round 4. Why? Because the other guy changed what he was doing. He's not doing what he did in round 2 no more. So now you got to kind of adapt. And there's like this back and forth chess game that's being played. I feel like Logan played that not so well against KSI. Again, he's still growing and learning in the sport.
Yeah.
Whereas Jake Paul, as of date, even though his fights were really short, he really played his hands well. Like he did a great job with Ben Askren. Short fight, but he got hit with a shot against Jake. Yeah. He stepped out, circled out, got right back on Askren. Excuse me. Askren hit Jake with a shot. Paul just circled out, came right back on him, stayed on him. He didn't like show any he didn't drop the game plan. He stayed right on it. He reacted really well. He acted like a true pro.
Yeah.
And I think he has that killer instinct, which I think is a very important thing at high level fights. For high level fights, super important to have that killer instinct. You start strong and you finish strong and you look strong throughout the fight. Whereas Logan, I felt like he was wearing his emotions on his sleeve.
Yeah.
He was getting caught up in the drama, and I think that's something that it lacks a little maturity, which I think will come together over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this would be a good spot to wrap it. Like I want to try and get this video up ASAP and try and scoop up some of the algorithm before the fight. And I appreciate you coming on with me and hashing this out and whatnot. And it was really fun to dig into some of this stuff and get your expert insight on things. Like it's not every day that we have somebody of your caliber who you can just bounce questions like this off of, So really appreciate you coming on. Is awesome. There everyone go follow Firas at it's TriStar Gym on YouTube, right?
That's right. TriStar
okay.
Gym, yeah.
Is there any other social media? Like you mentioned, you're not really on Instagram, but is there any other places that you'd want to plug or anything like that?
No, that's it, man. I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you guys for watching.
Have me on anytime. Okay. It was fun.
Killer. I appreciate that, man. Really. Thank you.
All right.